the rate of increase here at 4x over the last 11 months, that's an increase that just can't be ignored. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Good Question podcast. I'm Ronan Burke, CEO and co-founder of Inscribe. And today we're talking about AI-generated documents. This has been something we've been tracking very closely over the past year, and I'm very excited to talk more about it today. And so one of the key catalyzing metrics we discovered over the past few weeks is that we've seen a 4x increase over the past 11 months in AI-generated documents. And so this catalyzed us to have this conversation today to dig into that. And to help us answer all of these questions, we have Jessica from our risk operations team joining today, who we're very excited to hear her insights and have her contribute to the podcast. So yeah, Jessica, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Ronan, for having me on.
Cool. So to dig right into it, Jessica, I'd love to hear from your perspective about this increase we've seen. So 4x over the past 11 months in terms of AI generated documents, but would love to hear more about that and, what your initial reaction was when we produced this metric.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. 4x it's a pretty big number. Our detector was shipped in April of last year. And since then, it's been continuously iterated and improved upon. But, at the same time, as we all know, AI tooling has really improved within the last year as well. So along with that, it's become more popular and more accessible than ever. And so we've only seen AI generated documents increase over time, and it looks like that trend is going to continue.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable how much we've learned since we launched that last April. We'd love to hear from your perspective, what do these documents look like? And I think this would be just very helpful for the audience to, make this more tractable. We often talk about AI generated or modified documents, but what does that actually look like when one of them comes by your desk?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at a really convincing AI generated document, then I don't think anything is going to stand out at first glance to you, right? It's going to look like a real document. But there is a certain format that AI likes to generate when you ask it to make particular document types. So we've become familiar with that. For example, with bank statements, the way that I like to describe it is it looks like something that was made in Microsoft Excel. There's kind of a very table-like format with what looks to be cells that are used in spreadsheets in Microsoft Excel. But with bank statements specifically, there are some other tells in there too, right? So things like transactions having perfectly rounded whole numbers, or the transactions descriptions are overly generic and really vague. So for example, if you're expecting to see something like Walmart purchase in a transaction description, with an AI generated document, you might instead see something like that just says groceries, right? Which it doesn't really make sense. So there's little things like that.
Yeah, in a way, it's similar to how AI generated text has its own kind of characteristics. Like when you ask an LLM to write an email for you or to write a memo about a certain topic, it'll have these characteristics, which I think a lot of folks are becoming increasingly aware of, like a lot of rhetorical contrasts. EM dashes are obviously famously common in ChatGPT. But what I hear from your explanation there is that for document fraud, they also have these tendencies to different types of characteristics, but they are telltale signs that it has been generated with an LLM. Alludes to how we can catch these documents, which we'll get to later in the podcast. But you also bring up a good point in terms of AI generated docs and also modified docs. But I'd love to get your thoughts on why that distinction is so important and what that means for lending teams and fraud teams who are trying to tackle this problem.
Yeah, I would say that the more troubling documents that I tend to come across are not the ones that have been generated using AI from scratch, but are actually the legitimate documents that fraudsters then use AI to alter. So with these documents, in terms of formatting and visual characteristics, everything for the most part looks perfect and as expected, which makes them difficult to catch if you're just relying on your eye, right? Right now, we still see more AI generated documents than AI edited. And I think that's just because it's easier to make those than it is to have to take the additional step of, getting your hands on a real document.
Yeah, exactly. A subset of that I'm also curious about is the intersection of templates and AI tooling. So one of the, most common ways to modify doc is to use your own doc and then ask an LLM to modify it. But have we seen the use of LLMs modifying templates online? So typically with templates, we kind of see folks download them, or the tool they download them from enables them to kind of update the details in them. But I'm curious to see from your perspective if we have seen any trends there with templates being the starting point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a more sophisticated version of template fraud, right? Like as you mentioned, template documents historically, it's somebody making a fake bank statement. They sell it to people online and it gets reused hundreds of times. There may be small edits that you can make, but typically with a template, there are repeated characteristics that are pretty easy to detect. And that's still one of the biggest fraud vectors that we see. But with the help of AI now, you can create unique documents that don't share these repeated characteristics, and you can create them at scale. So I think what will happen is, these online template stores, they're going to pivot towards generating templates using AI and also leveraging AI to edit templates that, were previously just like static images.
Yeah, I'm very keen and interested in seeing how this evolves. And, I think it does kind of present a future where it's going to get increasingly difficult to catch these. On that note, we'd love to give your perspective on how we can catch these documents. What are the techniques we have available? We have alluded to a couple of them already, but from your perspective, how should we think about it? Both from a perspective like how can a human catch it, but also how can an automated system like Inscribe catch it?
Yeah, I mean, here at Inscribe, our AI generated detector looks at a variety of things like how the file was made, so specific details within the metadata, as well as visual characteristics that we've determined are associated with AI. Of course, visually, there are the things that I mentioned earlier, right? So specific formatting tells or overly simplistic language, rounded numbers, things of that nature. I think specifically here at Inscribe, though, the biggest advantage that we have is we have a vast database of categorized genuine documents, and we use AI to leverage that in our risk analysis. So we could receive a Chase Bank statement or a statement from a regional credit union. We know what a real version is supposed to look like, and that's not knowledge that everyone has, and it's still a valuable defense against AI fraud.
Yeah. I think what it also highlights as well is that the ways in which we can catch AI generated fraud does actually overlap with how we catch like your traditionally modified documents as well. The network in particular is helpful in catching all types of doc fraud and is robust to the various types of techniques used to perpetrate it. And, this is an evolving field as well. And one thing that we've learned over the past year and a bit since launching the first version of our AI generated detector is that we do need to evolve our detection techniques as the LLM providers change and as they kind of update how they produce outputs. Earlier on, you also talked a lot about bank statements as being, like a common or the key documents we see being modified. But is it the case that bank statements are the leading document that are modified with AI? And we'd love to hear from your perspective about why you think that is.
Yeah, that is exactly the case. We see mostly bank statements being targeted for AI fraud. And I think really that's because bank statements are the definitive source of truth for income verification, right? So it has all of that important cash flow information. You're almost always required to provide a bank statement if you're applying for any sort of financial product. And they can also serve as a proof of address. So if you have a good fake bank statement with, inflated income, then you could really be off to the races in terms of defrauding companies and accessing high value credit lines. The other thing with bank statements too is that they have a very standard and uniform formatting. So that makes them really good candidates for AI generation.
Yeah, it's basically aligns with why we see bank statements as one of the most commonly modified documents, regardless of the approach as well, which kind of just harks back to our previous discussion point on, the way in which you can catch AI generated document fraud is actually similar to how we catch document fraud in general. In that, it's actually more of an evolution of document fraud more so than an entirely new vector of fraud. A lot of the same challenges that exist, but also a lot of the same techniques to solve it exist as well. In terms of other trends, I'm interested to hear your perspective on, if bank statements are the most common document type that are vulnerable, are there certain use cases or certain institutions that we've seen to be more targeted by, AI generated fraud?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think with the rate that AI is going in terms of how prevalent it's becoming, I think everyone is going to be susceptible to being targeted. But here at Inscribe, I think we definitely tend to see it more on bank statements and specifically at lending institutions.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. On the perspective of like how fraudsters are using AI tools, have we seen any improvement or increase in sophistication over the past year in terms of like how they're applying AI and using it to create fake docs? And also, have we seen what kind of improvement have we seen in the tooling as well? What I'm trying to kind of understand here is, like, are the fraudsters just getting better and learning how to modify these docs with AI, or are the underlying image generation models getting better as well? It could be both, but curious to hear how you tease those apart.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like what has changed, I think last year AI documents looked almost painfully fake and were kind of full of these more classic AI tells, like the gibberish, nonsensical text, as well as having that kind of yellow color that everything made with AI had. But yeah, I'd say, in the last 6 months especially, those things are no longer obvious, right? And it's become more easy and accessible for fraudsters to access tooling that allows them to make more sophisticated documents. Really, it's as simple as prompting an LLM, hey, create a payslip that has, XYZ information, and then further iterating upon that. You can even upload an image of a document and ask AI to edit the name or the date. There are very simple guardrails in place with these AI tools, but sometimes you can circumvent those if you're skilled and clever enough with prompting, and so that's worrisome. And then, of
Yeah.
course, there are tools like FraudGPT that completely remove any sort of restrictions and guardrails that fraudsters can access if they have the means to do so. But I think it's a combination of both, right? It's fraudsters learning how to use the tooling and becoming more sophisticated in that way. And at the same time that that's happening, the tooling itself is getting better.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I honestly, I think using AI is a similar trend to every business in the world right now. I'm trying to ask that question as well. Like, how can businesses adopt AI to, make their operations more efficient? And fraudsters are industrializing as well. And they have very similar incentives. They want to make more money faster and cheaper. So yeah, the incentives are certainly aligned for them there. In terms of our ability, you mentioned like fraud GPT there, but can you talk about our ability to determine what LLMs have been used? Like, for example, can we tell if something is produced by ChatGPT versus fraud GPT or, a Claude model, et cetera?
Yeah, so there are certain characteristics, artifacts, and metadata that are associated with specific tooling that we can detect. And I think differentiating by tool is a pretty interesting data point. But at the end of the day, I think it's less important to know, was something made with ChatGPT or Gemini than it is to just know that this document is fabricated and it should be rejected.
Yeah. And yeah, I totally agree in terms of like, if it's produced by an LLM, it's a higher risk, I think. And if anything, if the two buckets we would kind of put them into would be, is it open source or closed source or like a private entity? And we have seen Claude and other large model providers implement guardrails to protect against their systems being used to create fake docs. But as we're all aware, there's workarounds to that. You can say, this is just for demo purposes, for educational purposes, et cetera, and you can get around those guardrails. But I think their guardrails here are going to improve over time as well. But, open source models without these guardrails are likely going to be the model of choice for fraudsters if they do get better on the closed source models. And on the note of AI improving for the fraudsters, it also brings up a question of, can we use AI to catch these documents as well? And is AI improving our ability to catch these documents? But yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective, Jessica, in terms of, can AI detect AI in terms of these AI modified documents?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI can be used to detect AI. We're doing it today in practice. Like I said, we leverage our AI tooling to index on our network detectors and our database of genuine documents. I'm thinking specifically of an example here that we had recently where There's a case of a bank statement that looked pretty convincing, and it had also been stripped of some of the digital watermarks that are associated with AI. We knew that it was fake, but we weren't 100% sure that it was AI. So it's not until that we dug into it and ran this document through some of our AI tooling that we found that over half of the transactions on this bank statement had a specific substring of numbers in them. So it was these three numbers that were repeated across the transaction descriptions and amounts. It's not something that a human looking at would notice off the bat, but our tooling helped us detect this. And that particular substring of numbers being repeated is not something that is statistically for a real statement or for a statement that has been edited by a human, but it's the exact sort of thing that AI would produce.
Yeah, that's such a great example. And I think it's a big area of research for us internally at Inscribe, using AI and agentic systems to catch fraud, and especially with semantic issues like you described there. Yeah, we've seen very powerful results as a result of this. And we've been working closely with customers to roll out this approach as well. Um, yeah, just wrapping up then, Jessica, two final questions. So is there anything else that has been surprising in terms of AI modified or generated docs that you've seen that has kind of been unexpected for you?
I don't think I'm surprised at how fraudsters are using AI or that it's so prevalent, but I do think I am surprised at how quickly this has come into play. I think just thinking about last year where we were at, where people were making fake documents and images and how obviously fake it was, and any human looking at it, you didn't need to be a seasoned fraud investigator to know that it was fake. Now where we have very sophisticated, very convincing documents that you almost have to be a seasoned fraud investigator and also have to have some sort of tool to leverage to check that it's fake. So I think, yeah, I'm not surprised at how fraudsters are using AI, but I'm definitely surprised at how quickly it's improved.
Yeah, I totally agree. The starting point, of course, is small here. It's a, a new threat vector. However, when it's increasing at this rate in its early months, it basically points to the future of what, doc manipulation is going to look like. And in particular, one trend I'm looking at understanding for next year is it the replacement for Adobe Photoshop or other similar PDF editing tools being used? Or is it additive for like a whole new set of fraudsters who might have been too lazy to use Adobe Photoshop, and now it just opens up, lowers the bar of entry, and creates a whole new kind of set of fraudsters? Yeah, that's certainly one to watch. And with our doc fraud report produced annually, these are the types of insights that we love to uncover. And then finally, then, what would your advice be to lending teams trying to grapple with this threat vector of AI modified and generated documents? Anything you think they can do now to protect themselves against this impending risk issue?
Yeah, I mean, you may have onboarded a good customer by all metrics, but as you just mentioned, the barrier to entry in terms of committing fraud is at an all-time low right now. So something that used to take time and technical skill with tools like Photoshop now can be done in minutes by somebody who has no skill, right? So there's historically good customers that may be part of your institution that are now taking that chance to commit fraud. So you're going to see people who may not have engaged in fraud yesterday start doing so tomorrow. And so you're going to need to get ready today. And that includes using tools like Inscribe and any other sort of tool that you can leverage in your toolbox.
Yeah, totally agreed. This has been a great conversation, Jessica. Thanks so much for the time. I think what sticks out to me most is just the importance for everybody in the industry to keep a close eye on this emerging issue. Every month we look at it, we're going to have some new learnings. And so, yeah, excited to keep the conversation going here. Yeah, thanks, Jessica, for joining. I'm Ronan, and this is the Good Question Podcast. Thank you all for listening.